Growing up in the Hargrove house meant learning one unspoken rule before you learned anything else. My brother came first. Always. In everything. And if you forgot that, even for a second, he'd find a way to remind you. I was 24 when it happened. Technically an adult. Technically capable of walking out the front door at any time. I know how that sounds. I've played that tape in my head 1,000 times since. You had a phone, you had legs. Why didn't you just leave? But when you've spent your entire life being told that your instincts are wrong, that your pain is exaggerated, that you're the dramatic one, you stop trusting yourself in ways that are hard to explain to people who grew up differently. My brother was 31. He'd moved back in after his second divorce, and somehow, in the span of 3 months, he'd rearranged the entire gravity of our household around himself. He worked out of the house, something with freight logistics, lots of phone calls, lots of stress, and our parents treated his stress like a weather event they were all perpetually bracing for. Don't upset him. Don't make noise after 10. Don't take the last of the coffee without making a new pot. Don't. I was working part-time at a dental office and taking 2 online classes. I paid $300 a month in rent, did my own laundry, bought my own groceries. I had a plan to save enough to move out by spring. It was October. He called it helping out. That's how he framed everything he made me do. Carrying boxes down from the attic, reorganizing the garage, loading his truck when he had pickups. I'm just asking you to help out. Why do you always make it a thing? And I would do it, because the alternative was a 2-hour argument that always ended the same way, my parents looking at the floor while he told me I had an attitude problem. The Saturday it happened started like any other. He wanted to move a chest freezer from the garage into the basement. It was old, probably 250 pounds empty. I told him we needed a second person, someone with actual upper body strength, maybe a dolly from the hardware store. He laughed at that, said I was overthinking it, said he'd done it a dozen times by himself. He just needed me to guide the bottom while he took the weight from the top. My mother was home. She was in the kitchen making soup. We got the freezer down 3 steps before something shifted. I don't know exactly what happened, whether he lost his grip or misjudged the weight or whether he just decided to let go, but the full force of it came down on my left side. I went down with it. The edge of the freezer caught my lower left ribs, and I heard something I will never unhear for the rest of my life. I couldn't breathe. I was on the concrete floor of the stairwell and I could not get air in, and the pain was, I don't have words for it. I've tried. It was like being simultaneously stabbed and crushed, radiating from my ribs through my back and up into my shoulder, and every tiny attempt to inhale made it worse. He stood over me for a moment. Then he said, "You let go." I told you to hold on. I managed to get out. I think something is broken. You're fine. You landed weird. Walk it off. He stepped over me. He went back upstairs. I lay on that cold floor for I don't know how long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. When I finally managed to roll onto my right side and push myself up, I had to stop twice because the room was going gray at the edges. I got up the stairs on my hands and knees, which is a particular kind of humiliation I don't wish on anyone. My mother was still in the kitchen. She looked up when I came in. I said, "I think he broke my ribs." She looked toward the hallway where my brother had disappeared. Then she looked back at me. She said, "You know how he gets when he's stressed. Just go lie down and take some Advil." That was it. That was the whole response. Go lie down and take some Advil. I went to my room. I took 4 Advil and lay very still on my right side and told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just bruised. Maybe it would feel better in the morning. It did not feel better in the morning. By Sunday night, I couldn't take a full breath without the pain spiking hard enough to make my vision blur. I couldn't sleep. I was rationing my breathing into these shallow little sips of air because anything deeper felt like someone was torquing a blade between my ribs. I kept thinking about internal bleeding. I'd taken a first aid class once, years ago, and I remembered something about ribs and lungs and how you could have what they called a pneumothorax and not always know it until things got bad. I went to my parents' room at 11 o'clock that night. My father was already half asleep. My mother sat up. I said, "I need to go to the emergency room. I think something is seriously wrong." My father said, "It's probably just a bruise. ERs are expensive." I said, "I have insurance through the dental office. I'll cover my own copay. I just need a ride because I can't drive like this." My mother looked at my father. My father looked at the ceiling. Then he said, "Let's see how you feel in the morning." I stood there in their doorway in the dark for a moment. I understood, in a way I hadn't fully let myself understand before, that they were not going to help me. Not because they couldn't, because helping me would mean acknowledging what had happened, and acknowledging what had happened would mean dealing with him, and dealing with him was something they had decided years ago was not worth the cost. I went back to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I thought, I could call 911 myself. Of course I could. I had a phone in my hand. And I want to be honest about why I didn't, because I think it matters. I was afraid. Not of my brother, not in that moment. I was afraid of what would happen afterward. Of being the one who caused a scene. Of my parents' faces. Of being 24 and still so conditioned to ask permission to take care of myself that I couldn't make that call without feeling like I was doing something wrong. That conditioning is what abuse does to you. It doesn't need locks or chains, it just needs enough years. I didn't sleep. By 5 in the morning, the pain was different, tighter, somehow, and there was a new sensation under my left arm that scared me more than anything had yet. I picked up my phone. I didn't call 911. I called my coworker, a woman named Diane, who was in her 40s and had a way of saying things plainly that I'd always appreciated. I said, "I think I need someone to take me to the ER. I got hurt yesterday and it's getting worse and my family won't take me." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "I'm getting my keys." "What's your address?" She was there in 20 minutes. She didn't ask a lot of questions in the car, which was the right call. I was focused entirely on breathing and not passing out. She just drove and occasionally said things like, "Almost there," and "You're okay," in this calm, steady voice that made me want to cry. The triage nurse took one look at me and moved me back quickly. The ER doctor was a woman, maybe early 40s, with the kind of efficiency that comes from years of seeing people who waited too long to come in. She pressed gently along my left side and I flinched hard at 2 specific points. She ordered a chest X-ray and a CT scan. The CT scan is where things changed. She came back into the room and she had a look on her face that I recognized as careful. The kind of careful that means someone is choosing their words. She said, "You have 2 fractured ribs on the left side. One of them has a small displacement, which is why you're having trouble breathing. We're going to take care of that." She paused. "I also need to ask you about some older injuries." I said, "What do you mean?" She showed me the scan on the screen. There were 2 additional fractures that had healed improperly. One was months old, maybe 6, and one was older than that. I hadn't known. I hadn't even known. She asked me how they happened. I sat there for a moment. I thought about what my mother had said. "Just go lie down and take some Advil." I thought about every version of that sentence I'd heard over 20 years, and I told her the truth. Not all of it, not right then. I didn't have the words yet for all of it. But I told her what had happened Saturday. The freezer. The stairs. Him walking away. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I have to let you know that I'm going to be contacting the hospital social worker, and given the nature of these injuries, it's likely that law enforcement will also be notified. That's not something I'm doing to you. It's something I'm required to do. But I want you to know before it happens." I nodded. I think I said okay. I was crying by then, which surprised me, not from fear, but from something more like relief. The specific physical sensation of a held breath finally released. The social worker came within the hour. Her name was Mrs. Odom, and she was soft-spoken and thorough, and she asked me questions I'd never been asked before. Not just about the freezer, but about the older injuries, about patterns, about whether I felt safe going home. I told her I didn't know. She said that was a completely valid answer and we'd figure it out together. 2 police officers arrived while I was still in the ER. They were professional and calm, and they took a statement. One of them was a woman, and at one point she said to me, quietly, "You did the right thing coming in." It was a small thing to say. It meant everything. Diane sat in the waiting room for 5 hours. She'd called in to cover my shift, told them I had a family emergency, and just stayed. When they finally let her back to see me, she hugged me carefully around my right side and said, "Whatever you need, I mean that." I was admitted overnight for monitoring. During those quiet hospital hours, something settled in me that hadn't been settled in a long time. I called my parents from my hospital bed. My mother answered. I told her where I was, what the scans had shown, that the police had been contacted. There was a long silence. Then she said my brother hadn't meant to let go of the freezer. I said, "That's not what the older fractures are about." Another silence. I said, "I'm not coming home." I didn't go back to that house. Diane had a spare room and she offered it without making it a favor, just a fact, a door that was open if I needed it. I stayed there for 6 weeks while I got stable. My brother was arrested 3 days after my hospitalization. The charges were felony assault causing great bodily injury. When the detective called to update me, she mentioned that once the investigation opened, 2 other people had come forward. One was a woman he dated briefly 2 years ago. One was a former business partner who'd had a physical altercation with him that had never been reported. Neither of them had thought anyone would believe them. Both of them, it turned out, had been waiting for exactly this. My parents hired him a lawyer. They did not call me. The case took 8 months to work through the system. I got a victim's advocate, a woman named Beverly, and I want to say something about her that I think people don't understand about the legal process. Having someone in your corner whose entire job is to explain what's happening and make sure you're not forgotten in the machinery of it is not a small thing. It's an enormous thing. She drove me to the DA's office. She sat with me before my deposition. She called to check in on weeks when nothing was happening, which are the hardest weeks, when you have nothing to do but wait and wonder if it's all going to fall apart. It didn't fall apart. He was convicted of felony assault. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the verdict came in, I was sitting in that courtroom in a blazer I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I don't know why that detail stays with me, but it does. The way I'd stood in the Target dressing room, thinking I need to look like someone who was taken seriously, and when the forewoman read the words, I felt something leave my body that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. He was sentenced to 3 years. The judge cited the history of prior unreported injuries, the nature of the attack, and what she called a pattern of conduct enabled by familial silence. Those last 3 words, enabled by familial silence. I wrote them down. My parents were in the courtroom. My mother cried. I don't know what she was crying for, him probably. Maybe for herself. Maybe somewhere underneath it all for me. I don't think I'll ever know for certain, and I've had to make a kind of peace with not knowing. What I know is this: I moved into my own apartment 4 months after the trial. A 1-bedroom in a building with a parking garage and a property manager who has a rule against unannounced visitors. I painted the living room a dark green that my mother would have called depressing and I think is perfect. I put plants on the windowsill. I have a weighted blanket and a coffee maker with a timer and mornings that are completely, entirely, unremarkably mine. I still see Diane. We get lunch every few weeks. She never made a big deal of what she did that morning. Just shrugs it off, says anyone would have done it. I know that's not true. I know it because I spent years surrounded by people who didn't. But I think that's her way of telling me that I was worth doing it for, without making me feel like I owe her something I can never pay back. That's its own kind of kindness. I have one more thing to say. For anyone listening who recognizes something in this story, the voice in your head that says, I'm probably overreacting, I should just wait and see, I don't want to cause a scene, that voice was put there by someone who needed you to stay quiet. It is not your voice. It never was. You don't need permission to take care of yourself. You never did.